Hello! Today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the month of February. Hopefully I'm not just like coughing through this whole video because I was really sick last week with a pretty gnarly cold and now it's just like sitting in there, which is super fun. Love it, having a great time. So if I sound a little bit different, that's why. Let's get into it. Starting off with a terrible book. I hated this book so much. I read Eligible by Curtis Sittenfeld. This is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice set in modern times. It's awful. I don't think I can overemphasize how much I hated this book. I thought it was gonna be like a 2-star read for me for most of it, where I just didn't like it. I thought it was modern Jane Austen stripped of all heart. That's how I felt about the first 2/3 of this book, we'll say. This had some of the most unlikable protagonists that I've encountered in a long time. Every single one of the Bennet sisters was awful. A lot of times when people talk about a female character's likability, I'm like, red flags are raised. What are you talking about? It can sometimes feel like a dog whistle for like assertive woman. That's not the case here. These characters are unlikable because they are so incredibly entitled. Out of the entire Bennet family, the two characters that you're most supposed to empathize with are Lizzie and Jane, which like, yeah, got it, matches the original Pride and Prejudice. We're good there. However, they're fucking incompetent. I liked that they were aged up. So Lizzie is in her late 30s and Jane is, I think, 38, 39, 40, somewhere around there. I thought that was a good adaptation choice. However, Jane is a 40-year-old yoga instructor who lives in New York City and her parents still pay her rent. Out the gate, I was kind of like, huh. She reads as an entitled kid with no responsibility who never grew out of that entitlement and who is still incredibly irresponsible. So I was just kind of like, I don't give a shit about you. And then we have Lizzie, who is supposed to be the most competent of her family. She's like a hotshot reporter at some kind of cosmopolitan stand-in magazine. She's terrible at her job. What I mean by that is at one point she's trying to get an interview with this woman who's kind of a mix between like Gloria Steinem and like a Sheryl Sandberg businesswoman mixed into one. Naturally, because this is like a huge figure in this world, she can't get an interview very easily until finally she does. This woman's publicist calls her and is like, she's available for a chat like in a couple of minutes. Lizzie, who had just been on a run, was like, oh no, can't take this call because there is a small chance that I might be slightly out of breath and also like I'm kind of uncomfy in my sweaty clothes. This is for a phone interview. If you are working really hard to get that interview and then you get it, you fucking breathe deeply, get ready for your call in 5 minutes and make the call. So Lizzie lies to this publicist and I was just like, oh, fuck off. This is so annoying. If keeping your job depends on getting an interview with one person, you don't fucking lie to get out of that interview. That's just, oh my God. It seems like I'm ranting a lot about this and it was mostly, those were annoyances rather than things I like truly hated. And then we get to the Wickham stand-in plotline. I'm gonna talk some Pride and Prejudice spoilers for a second, and if you're spoiled, I don't really care. It is the year 2019. In the original Pride and Prejudice, Wickham is a villain. He basically takes advantage of Darcy's younger sister and takes advantage of Lizzie's younger sister, Lydia. In this version, the scandal is not really Lydia and Wickham's elopement, although they do get eloped in this version. Wickham is this character named Ham, and Ham is a transgender man, and that is revealed 2/3 of the way through the book, and that is the scandal. That's the stand-in for the villain. It is a big surprise, it's a trans person reveal, and I was furious reading this. Furious. It was shoehorned in, it was terrible representation. It's a stand-in for a villainous character in the original, and then after that, we just have non-stop transphobic comments from the entire family. Moving forward, content warning for transphobia, because I'm gonna talk about some of the stuff that is said in this book. The first question to come from Lizzie, who is not supposed to be like the transphobic character within the context of the book, she's supposed to be one of the more accepting ones. The very first thing she says is, does he have a penis? Then you have Mrs. Bennet, who does not know what a transgender person is, which in the year, I think this is set in like 2015, 2016. She's characterized as a woman who watches like a lot of Fox News. And during that period of time, you had a bunch of conservative legislatures introducing bathroom bills that were just blatant attacks on trans rights. And Fox News was all about the fear mongering in that point in time. So that logically doesn't make any sense to me. And then once Mrs. Bennet finally understands what it means to be trans, she cuts off all communication with her daughter and does not reconnect until Darcy, who we are also supposed to view as like a more accepting character, explains it to her as a birth defect. Just like, what the fuck? There's like minimal lip service paid to how this kind of stuff isn't politically correct. And I was just like, fuck off with that. Get out of here. You're using a reveal of someone as trans as a plot twist. You're using that also as a stand-in for the villainous character in the original adaptation. That's context that you can't ignore. And then on top of that, there's just incessant transphobia from literally everyone. Then we also have the fact that Mrs. Bennet is very racist and anti-Semitic. She doesn't trust a black realtor because he's black, and she makes anti-Semitic comments all the time. And when Lizzie sees those kind of comments or like reflects on them, it's always like, ugh, there goes mom embarrassing us again. So bigotry is always framed as an embarrassment for the cis straight white characters as opposed to as like a bad thing. It's a god-awful book. I cannot overemphasize how much I hated this. It's terrible. Okay, I'm gonna stop ranting about that book and move on to My Sister the Serial Killer by Onyikan Brathwaite. This is a character-driven thriller, I put thriller in quotes, set in Nigeria. We follow Korede, who is getting increasingly annoyed with her sister, who just can't stop murdering her boyfriends, apparently in self-defense. Korede always comes in to help her clean it up, and things are kind of, you know, tenuously okay until her sister Ayula sets her sights on the man that Korede is in love with. This is an interesting character study. I wouldn't say that there's a lot of like thriller elements. It's more about the relationship between Korede and her sister as opposed to like a whodunit. Obviously, we know whodunit. The writing in this feels almost a little sparse, but it really works. It forces you as a reader to kind of dig into Korede as a character. In digging in a little deeper, it forces you to kind of engage with the fact of like, oh, is this a reliable narrator? What's like the true source of her internal conflict? That was part of this book that I really enjoyed. But the climax of the book didn't really work for me. It reads like what you would expect in a thriller, and because this is very much a character-driven book, that felt a little bit incongruous to me. I wanted that conflict to be more internal versus external. And then at the end, Korede's character arc feels a little bit lackluster, or that's just like lacking in some way. I'd say that I really enjoyed the first 2/3 of this, and the final third I was like a little bit iffy on, so I think I ended up giving this 3 stars. Next, I read Wicked Saints by Emily A. Duncan. This I read through NetGalley. I don't think it's out yet. I got 51% of the way through this before I put it down. It was not for me, and I think it's more about my reading tastes and like my opinions about things as opposed to the book itself, which I'm gonna get into. I will say that I really appreciated the fact that this is set in a Slavic inspired world, and clearly the author knows her shit. A really quick tell if you see like a Slavic inspired book is to look at last names, because Slavic last names are different for men and women. If you have a last name that is originally an adjective or derived from an adjective, you'll see usually a Y ending for men and an A ending for women. And as a general rule for other last names, for women, you'll see OVA at the end of the last name. So a lot of Slavic inspired books written by people who aren't from Eastern Europe or Slavic cultures, you'll see that last names are standard for both men and women. And that's like a very quick red flag that the author like doesn't really know what they're doing. So it was nice to see an author that did know what they were doing in that regard. The atmosphere of this book is incredibly well done. It is very violent, very bloody, but I was really impressed with all of that. So the reason I DNF'd this, I think, is because I have some personal issues with organized religion in general. One of the main characters that we follow is a girl named Nadia, and she's deeply religious. Her powers derive from her connection to a pantheon of gods. However, even though we're dealing with a polytheistic society, the language associated with religion and the setting bring to mind a lot of stuff around Christianity in Eastern Europe, which has a very, very fraught history, particularly when it comes to people who were branded heretics by the church. I think if this book had just had the religious aspects or the Slavic setting, I wouldn't have had any problem, but it was those two things in combination where I was kind of like, ooh, I'm a little uncomfortable. Seeing a main character who is so deeply ingrained with organized religion within her society, who has been taught to hate a bunch of people that she calls heretics, it's like, not feeling great about this. You can kind of tell that those beliefs are probably going to be challenged, but I was halfway through the book and I wasn't really seeing it, so I put that down. Also, really quickly, before I move on, I think this was probably going to be a little bit too long. It felt pretty long halfway through, and I think that's because there were too many perspectives. We did not need the second perspective that we got. We really only needed Nadia's, and on top of that, there's like a romantic subplot, and it developed way too quickly. You basically had someone that Nadia would have previously called a heretic caressing her face after a single like trust building interaction. Like, you don't know each other that well. I'm uncomfy. I don't like this. This is no thanks. So yeah, I didn't like this, but I think it was very much about my own tastes as opposed to the book itself. Next, I read Wondersmith by Jessica Townsend, and this is book 2 in the Morrigan Crow series, which is a middle grade series that I adore. It is so, so good. Just delightful and whimsical and dark in all the right ways. It's amazing. I'm not really gonna speak to plot of book 2 because it spoils a lot for book 1, but the story starts with Morrigan Crow as a 10-year-old girl who was born on Eventide, which means that she is a cursed child, and everything bad to happen anywhere in the state that she lives is blamed on her being cursed. So that can range from natural disasters to like someone got a paper cut after looking at her across the town square. She has known her entire life that she is going to die when she turns 11. However, that doesn't happen. She gets whisked off by a mysterious man named Jupiter North, who takes her into this hidden state, and he takes her to the city of Nevermore in this hidden state where there's magic everywhere, and she enters a competition to win a spot at the prestigious Wondrous Society. And it's just so wonderful, and as I said, delightful. It's a world that's very casually diverse. It doesn't feel shoehorned in, but I like that Townsend puts an effort into describing things like skin tone and hair, which I think is really important. We are conditioned to default to whiteness when we aren't told what a character looks like. When everyone is described, their skin tone, their hair, all of that, I think it helps to deconstruct assumed whiteness. And then on top of that, I think it's important to give kids examples of representation. Kids deserve to see themselves in stories. Also, I think it's a cop-out when authors after the fact are like, yeah, sure, it's a valid interpretation to see X character as Black. On the one hand, like, yes, I think that's a good thing to do, but on the other, it absolves the author of guilt and it allows them to kind of pretend that they wrote a more diverse story than they did. So in seeing like this naturally diverse cast of characters, it's just wonderful and lovely, and I adored it. I also think the books play with some really interesting themes. Morrigan Crow, our main character, who's like a goth queen, I love her, she is forced to continually confront the fact that the people that she is supposed to trust, that are supposed to look out for her, that are supposed to know what to do, often just don't. And that's a hard lesson to learn in life, and I think the book deals with it with nuance and empathy and explores those themes in really interesting ways. So book 2 in the series, I thought, does exactly what a second book in a long series should do, in that it raises the stakes a bit. It deepens the relationships quite a lot. It takes a closer look at characters other than the handful of main characters. It takes more time to dig into the world, so it feels more rich. I loved it. I read the audiobook, and these are fabulous audiobook productions. I didn't know this, but the woman who reads this, she plays Yara Greyjoy in the Game of Thrones series. She does an absolutely amazing job. I just adore these books. Even if you don't think you like middle grade that much, I think this is a middle grade series that is just so well done and is kind of like universal for people who are like, I don't really think I like middle grade. When they read this book, they're like, oh yeah, I like this. So that's really fun. And I should say, for those of you that aren't familiar, the term middle grade usually refers to like, I think 9 through 13, like that age range. So that's what I'm talking about when I say middle grade. Next, I read An American Marriage by Tyree Jones. This is literary fiction. We follow a newlywed Black couple, and shortly after they're married, the husband gets convicted of a crime that he didn't commit. So we follow them over the course of this marriage. It's a partly epistolary novel, so we have traditional narrative prose, and then sections of the book are written as letters between the husband and wife. I think I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed the writing. I found at times that the letters were overly sentimental for me. That's like kind of a hard line to toe, because on the one hand, it's a letter to your spouse, so you would expect it to be kind of sentimental, but I didn't really want to read a super sentimental letter. So that's on me. But overall, I really liked it. I appreciated how Jones crafted characters who regularly made decisions that you were just like, ugh, oh no, but you never lost your connection to them as a reader. You never like lost empathy or sympathy for them. And I think that's a really difficult thing to do, and she did it so, so well. Definitely recommend this. I really enjoyed it. Next, I read The Bride Test by Helen Huang. This is romance. Helen Huang kind of burst onto the scene last year with The Kiss Quotient, which I really enjoyed. This I liked. liked. I had some issues. In this we follow Esme and Kai. Kai has autism, and I thought it was really cool to see a very different representation of autism than what we saw in The Kiss Quotient. Kai's mom goes to Vietnam where she runs into Esme, who works as a cleaner, and she decides that Esme is the perfect woman to be Kai's wife and invites her to come to the States. And when she's in the States, she's gonna like try and woo Kai. That relationship dynamic is just, it's pretty imbalanced. And that was the root of a lot of my issues with the story. I think Huang tried to counterbalance that with a heavy emphasis on consent and with a heavy emphasis on Esme's own internal wants and desires, especially in regards to getting educated. I thought that was really good. I don't think it quite succeeded in balancing the starting power imbalance of the relationship between Kai and Esme. Another thing I did really like about this though is that in Esme we have a character who doesn't really speak English. She slowly learns more, but speaks with an accent, speaks, especially at first, in more broken English, and she also isn't educated, and yet she's never made to seem lesser for any of those things. I liked that she doesn't know certain cultural cues in the US, and again, is not made to seem dumb or inferior because of those things. Just again, that power imbalance thing kind of threw me. Next, I read The Collected Schizophrenias by Esme Wei-Jun Wang, and this is an essay collection that won the Grey Wolf Press Nonfiction Prize. It's a mix of very personal and also kind of more like journalistic essays that are largely centered around what Wei-Jun Wang calls the schizophrenias, things that fall under that kind of like umbrella of diagnoses. Wei-Jun Wang was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder bipolar type, which in a very oversimplified explanation is basically a mix between schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. And this was a book that left me very emotional. It is gorgeously written. It is incredibly nuanced. I loved every single essay, and I think it's something that I needed to read. So this year, I've kind of alluded to, it has not been great in terms of mental health. Not for me specifically. Part of the reason I've always been kind of vague talking about it is because while mental illness does affect my life, it's not my own diagnosis, and so it feels weird to like co-opt a story that isn't mine to tell. So I'm not really gonna get into all of that, but I will say that this was very meaningful to me for very personal reasons. And I think this articulated some things I didn't understand, particularly around what it is like and what it means to be 5150, which is used as kind of a catch-all. It's the, I think maybe police code, medical code, I'm not sure, you know, in what world the code applies. Basically, it means a person needs to be involuntarily committed to psychiatric treatment, usually in the psychiatric ward of a hospital or within a psychiatric hospital itself. Wei-Jun Wang has experienced that, and she discusses her experiences, and I think that was something that I needed to read and didn't really know that I needed to read. It's just an absolutely phenomenal book. I will say, by the end of it, I felt like a raw, exposed nerve. I was incredibly emotional. I was really emotional while reading the whole thing, but afterwards, even though I think this is a gorgeous book, an incredibly important book, and I would definitely recommend it, it left me not in the happiest of places. So I think that's something important to know going into this. Still, this was a 5-star read to me. Absolutely gorgeous. Cannot recommend it enough. I also was really lucky in that I got to go to the launch event for this. That kind of makes it sound like it was invitation only. It was like an open event. Green Apple Books put it on. I just love Green Apple so much. They are a bookstore in San Francisco, and they are the best. Amazing. Also the best is Russell from Ink and Paper Blog. He was the one who told me that this event was happening, and so I went with him. It's always wonderful to see him, and I always leave with 8 million book recommendations. He reads like almost exclusively women authors, which is great, and I always go to him for recommendations when it comes to literary fiction. So definitely go check out his channel. He's the best. Those are my thoughts on this amazing but difficult book. After reading The Collected Schizophrenias, I was not in the best place. Emotionally speaking, I was sad. Not depressed, just sad. And so I wanted to read something that was gonna make me feel better. I wanted some escapism, I wanted some fluff, and I wanted it to be good. I did not want to read lighthearted fluff that was like fine or bad. Sometimes you want to like not think you'll put on a shitty reality TV show, but that's not what I wanted. I wanted some escapism that was actually good. And thankfully, I have some wonderful friends who knew exactly the right book. Madeline from Novel Inc., Chelsea from Chelsea Darling Reads, and Jane from It's Jane Lindsay. I will leave a link to all their channels down below. They're all amazing ladies. They had all just finished the wonderful Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. I was lucky enough to get approved for an advanced copy via NetGalley, so I started reading this when I was not feeling so good, and oh my goodness, What a wonderful decision. Now I need to be honest with you all and with myself. I did not think that I was gonna like this. If this had not come with such a strong recommendation from all three of those women to get rave reviews from all three of them, I was like, maybe I have judged this too quickly. And oh boy, had I. Part of the reason that I judged this was I was like, that's a kind of corny title. And the premise itself is a little corny. In this, we follow Alex, who is the first son. He's the son of the President of the United States, who is a kick-ass woman, and he gets into a little kerfuffle with the Prince of England, who is his arch nemesis, and they have to then pretend to be best friends in order to like save face, to avert a PR disaster. Maybe, perhaps, some romantic things happen. It's a new adult gay rom-com with the President of the United States son and the Prince of England. And I was like, okay, that's a lot. But oh my God, it works so well. So well. I adored it. It's gonna be on my favorite books of 2019 list. It is exactly what I wanted, which is fluff and a little bit of escapism and also a little bit of wish fulfillment, but not the kind that makes you feel bad, not the kind that you're like embarrassed to talk about after the fact. I am completely eating my words when it comes to my quick judgment, which was so incorrect. I loved the development of the romance. I loved the platonic relationships between friends. I loved the dialogue. This is a book that has funny, witty characters who are actually funny and witty. A lot of times when you read characters that are supposed to be funny, it comes off as cringy. It comes off as like kind of jarring and stilted and doesn't have the flow of like actual witty banter amongst friends. That was amazing. I loved that in Alex, we got this protagonist who's like kind of all over the place and kind of a mess, just like a lot. I related to a lot of his behavior because I don't know how much comes across on this channel, but I can be a little bit of a mess. So it was really fun seeing that, and I don't think I realized how few times I'd seen a character like him before in a contemporary book. That was just lovely. The politics are amazing. This is a book that doesn't erase the not so good aspects of the United States, but it left me feeling hopeful in like the most wonderful ways. I read this and I was like, oh my God, am I secretly a romantic? That was not something I thought about myself, but like maybe I was wrong. It touched my heart. I loved it so much. Oh my goodness, I cannot wait for everybody to read this. It's going to be very big. I think this is going to be a very big book, a la Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I just adored it. I cannot wait to see what else Casey McQuiston comes out with. Their work is just so, so, so good. I loved it. So good. Look at, I'm smiling so much. I feel like a cornball right now, but oh my goodness, it's amazing. It comes out in May. Prepare thyself. And lastly, I read Moxie by Jennifer Matthew. This is a YA contemporary about a girl in a small Texas town who is fed up with the rampant sexism and misogyny at her school, and so she gets inspired by her mother's riot girl past and decides to create a zine called Moxie. It's pretty good. I think it's a good like introduction to feminism for young adult readers. If you're like pretty versed in feminism, it will feel introductory, but who is this for? It's for young adult readers, so like keep that in mind. The one thing I will say is, while this does not feel overtly like white feministy, there are some attempts to engage with intersectionality. It is still a book centered on the experience of a white girl. So, I mean, that's what you're gonna get. So it isn't like a bad representation of feminism, just at times it teeters towards the edge of that. It never tips over, but a couple times I was like, So that's something to keep in mind. I think I gave this like 3 stars, 3.5 stars. All things considered, it's pretty good. So that's it for what I read in February. Let me know if you've read any of these, what you thought, what you read in February. I want to hear it all. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe to see more of my face. You can find me on Twitter at PossiblyLit and on Instagram at PossiblyLiterate, and I will see you next time.